Our podcast today will be starting in a little bit over 6 minutes from now. We'll have Tyler Jefcoat talking about aggregators and a lot of the things that he's seeing in the finance world. Welcome to the My Amazon Guy podcast. My name is Stephen Pope, and I'm the founder of My Amazon Guy. Today is going to be a bit of a treat. We're going to have a guest speaker, Tyler Jefcoat. I'll bring him on in just a moment. Before I do that, I want to show you that we actually did an interview with Tyler back in 2018. Need to figure out how to make that a little bit bigger here. Let's try. There we go. So in 2018, this is in August of 2018, we made a prediction together, both me and Tyler, of massive seller acquisitions and mergers starting. So this is well before the term Amazon aggregator was ever coined or anything like that. By the way, I do own AmazonAggregators.com. So this is something I will be paying a lot more attention to as time goes on. We've had Tyler on our podcast several times. You can see we've interviewed him recently, as well as several times a couple of years ago on profit, taxes, bookkeeping. He is the owner of Seller Accountants, and we very much endorse his services, fractional CFO type work as well. And if you need any bookkeeping, definitely check out Tyler. So with that in mind, I'm going to bring in Tyler to our podcast now. Tyler, thanks for coming on.
Hey, Steven. Good to see you, buddy.
Well, it's good to have you on again. I'm really excited about the topic today because you're going to be talking about Amazon aggregators with some data, right? So like a lot of people have been talking about how there's a ton of money coming into the space, right? So we know for just one example, Thrasio last year, they raised $1 billion. And then even in February, they raised another $750 million. So there's billions of dollars entering the space with, upwards of 100 different aggregators that are just getting started. So with that in mind, Tyler, go ahead and tease us a little bit. What are you going to be showing us today?
So, you kind of get the word aggregate in two senses we're going to talk about today. The first one, which I have better data on, is we actually just aggregate real Amazon sales each year. So before the aggregators kind of stole the term, it was really how do you benchmark the industry, right? So Pope, you and I can talk a little bit about how performance is changing. And part of this has been driven by the other form of aggregate, which is the aggregator. All of a sudden, you have a business type that's been built around how do I bring as much data, as many ASINs, as many products together under one house and enjoy the economies of scale of selling them together as one unit instead of the all these different, sellers that are out there doing it. And so I think I do have some things to mention to you about that also. I think it's really fascinating. Pope, it's funny. My hair is exactly the same as it was 3 years ago.
We'll bring this back on screen and make fun of me. Okay. All right, here we go. Let's see if I can find this. Add to stream. Okay. So back then I had a lot more hair. Let's see. Where's a good shot that shows this? I don't know if that one shows it, but yes, it is dwindling.
Is that entrepreneurship, Stephen? Is that what does that to you? I don't know, but
something. Three kids under 5, a fourth one on the way, due here in a couple months. Something about having kids and having business babies as well.
Love it, man. Well, listen, dude, I'm proud of what you've done. I mean, what makes this show kind of interesting, guys, is that we've done it together a few times. And I think, so why don't we start with, since I'm in charge here somehow, this is not my show, but so why don't we start with go ahead.
What I'm thinking is like take 10 minutes and tell the story. And then once you set up this storyline and the data, I think we'll get some questions from our live audience here.
Okay.
The other piece of advice, Tyler, go ahead and look directly into the camera a little bit more. You tend to look down a tiny bit. Yeah. All right. So Tyler, tell us what's cool. What's happening?
All right. So what we did in 2020 was we took a whole bunch of 2019 data, about 150 million in aggregate sales. And we built a picture of the profitability of an average Amazon seller. What we've done this year is the same thing with a larger pile of data, closer to $250 million, 250 million in sales for the year 2020. And so now that we have two large sets of data next to each other, we can start to wrestle with the question, Stephen, what's changing about the performance of the Amazon businesses? For instance, one of the things we noticed is that year over year, these sellers are up by about 34%. So, to the extent that your business was up by more than 34% in 2020 over 2019, you had a good year relative to the industry. To the extent that your business is not at least up a third from the year prior, you probably lagged, maybe had a negative impact from the coronavirus and the pandemic stuff. So again, to aggregate, right? What does it mean to aggregate? It means to take data or information, or if you think about the aggregators, products from different areas and bring them together into one family So that, if think about it, the ultimate aggregator has always been Walmart, right? You're going to take products from all different walks of life and share the same data set and overhead so that I can be as lean and mean as I can. And so when you think about this phenomenon, which will be kind of our second part of the topic, which is the aggregator investor, their entire business model is to take or aggregate different brands, different products, and try to put them in one bucket so that they can make the sum of the parts greater than the individual pieces put together, that kind of thing. And so on the aggregate study, where we aggregated just data, we took the sales, the cost of goods sold, the FBA fees, the advertising fees. Stephen, am I able to share a screen real quick? I'll just show them what this looks like. So
yeah, actually, I've never had somebody else screen share on my stream, so not sure how to do this. We'll find out live.
All right, we're trying this live here. Let's see what happens here. Did it work?
Looks like it works. All right, so we got some inception going on right now.
Well, let's get that one out of the way. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay, so this is kind of the summation of the what I would call the top 10% performers from our aggregate study at Seller Accountants. So this is, again, about, of the larger sellers, this is about 200 or so million in sales for last year. And what you're looking at on my screen here is what you would call kind of the average. So I thought what's kind of interesting here is
don't hesitate to zoom in, by the way.
Let's say it again.
Don't hesitate to zoom in.
Okay. Man, let me zoom it, baby. Make this as big as we can here. So something that I think is interesting about these premium performers, which I would view this grouping here as being fairly premium, is
dude, look at you. You're drawing on screen and everything.
Look at this, dude. I'm telling you, the accountant gone wild here. Our cost of goods sold factor for our stronger sellers is at about 30%, even a little bit better, to the extent that your landed amount of cash going into your product is higher than a third. I'm not concerned about your business as long as this other thing down here called advertising is close to where these guys are here. So this is the combination of these two metrics. Let's understand what it's taking me to secure my product. In aggregate for the larger sellers last year was about 30 points. Let's see what it's taking us to advertise those products, about 11 points. And if the combination of those two numbers is less than 40%, I'm really, really happy as a CFO with you right now. So you can kind of look at this picture. It's almost exactly 40% is 11.2 plus 29.6. That leaves us with some margin to play with. And so after FBA fees, after the Amazon commissions, the average seller was left with a metric called post-advertising gross profit. It just means margin after ads of almost 30 points. And these are this is not, the entire population was a little bit worse than this. It was closer to 25% after ads. But these strongest, best, I think, aspirational brands, the kind of brands that you want to emulate, we're getting about 30 points after advertising. They kept their overhead pretty low, 12 points in salaries, software, consultants, and the like. And they were left with about 17% operating profit, which was better than we saw in 2019. 2019 was about 14 or 15% for our top performers. So
it went up from 15% profit in 2019 to 17.4 in 2020. That's a big jump.
Pretty big jump. And not to mention the overall volume went up 33%. So if you kind of did the numbers here, this is almost 10 million in sales. They would have been doing, 7.5 million in sales last year. Now they're doing 10 million and they're more profitable. So I think as an industry, we're enjoying some economies of scale. Does that, one thing I will mention here though, and I want to get your comment on this, Stephen, is there has been pressure on advertising as Amazon moves more of the marketplace real estate towards ads, right? There's an additional ad that pops up above the fold now than there maybe was a few months ago. In general, we're seeing more and more need to advertise to push the products. Is that what you're experiencing? Are you seeing that also?
Very much. A lot of the external games that people would play too with like search, find, buy have diminished in functionality and value. It's also still impossible to track Facebook ads going into Amazon. Though there are many programs that are effective, it's just impossible to track effectively. So because of that, there's just a lot more need for some of this information or some of the advertising within Seller Central specifically. So costs have gone up on advertising. We also know that click-through rate is slightly down, and that's because there's just so much more to look at, right? They're running out of real estate on Amazon.
Right.
So I think that advertising is a number one critical, most important thing people get right when running their Amazon business. If you don't get ads right, nothing else will matter.
Yep.
There are many businesses that are old school retailers, manufacturers, wholesalers who have deprioritized advertising and are still doing well on Amazon. But anybody new to the block trying to launch or just get started would pretty much be left in the dust without a robust advertising plan, right? So like the number one thing people need to do when they launch a product is spend a lot on advertising. So it's a lot more complex. It's a lot harder. There's a lot more AI available, but Amazon's also launching a lot more ad types, right? We've got like the display retargeting functionalities. A lot of those things that didn't exist are coming out of nowhere and being important. And I've made a frequent prediction. I think by end of year we're going to see Twitch show video ads for Amazon listings, and so it'll be fun to see kind of what happens. Mark Kahn says, "This is great info. You're very welcome." I honestly think this is one of the most fascinating pieces of data that we're gonna present on our podcast here this quarter. A lot of good information. So Tyler, what are when you put this together, what do you think was like the most surprising thing about the data?
The thing that I've seen now 2 years in a row that has been most surprising to me is that there is an awkward adolescence for Amazon sellers, and the revenue is somewhere, it depends on your product blend, but somewhere between $1 million a year in sales and about $3 million a year in sales. A lot of sellers kind of run into a buzzsaw. All of a sudden they can't one-man shop it anymore, and they're having to build some actual infrastructure into their business. And the result of that, not surprisingly, is that they get a lot less profitable. And so that was one of our big ahas last year, and it held true this year also, is that the rich are getting richer. The biggest, most established sellers are the ones that are getting the best returns on investment. But the second best is actually the little bitty guy that's doing like $500,000 a year in sales, has zero overhead, is extremely simple, and is therefore able to keep an eye on each ball himself or herself. But you reach some point, Stephen, as you and I both have in our businesses, where you can't spin all those plates at the same time as the CEO, and you're awkward. You're not as good as you thought you were going to be at hiring the right person the first time, or implementing a scaling strategy the first time, or renegotiating your supply chain the first time. And so I think that's been one of my big ahas again, is if that's you, if you've reached, depending again on your category, $1 million or maybe $2 million in sales, and you're getting really frustrated, it could be that you just need to push through how to actually build this thing that's a couple of products into an actual company. I mean, I don't know. Are you seeing that, Pope? Are you seeing a lot of frustration with your mid-tier sellers?
I think it's a really hard barrier to cross as an entrepreneur, right? So like I'm in the same kind of barrier right now as an agency as we're trying to take it to the next level, right? Like every time you go through a certain growth plan, there's always growing pains. And a lot of the entrepreneurs that had a side hustle and now they're trying to take it from side hustle to main hustle and take it to the next level, they reach a lot of barriers, right? So they need more people, they need an expert agency, or they need competent internal hires. And then how do you find those people? And then all of a sudden, instead of being an e-commerce business selling products, all of a sudden you're an HR shop, right? And then on Monday morning, you're talking to your employees about their weekend and all the problems that they've dealt with, instead of focused on your P&L.
Yep.
But in reality, that's actually what you should be doing as an entrepreneur, because if you take care of your people, the people will take care of the business, in theory, right? So those are the kind of things I think people very much grapple with.
Yeah.
So you're a numbers man, and you've seen a lot of numbers in your day. You've seen a lot of businesses. You've seen a lot of books, and it's fascinating to kind of look at that as time goes on, right? So why did you do this study? Like, why did you want to do an aggregate study of FBA businesses to see like how everybody's stacking up?
I'll tell you why. So Stephen, I first met you at Prosper 18, right? We were sitting around a lunch table, and
we both live in Georgia, by the way, our viewers. And so we had to go to Vegas to meet each other.
And for both of us, it was within a month of us actually starting our businesses. And so we're sitting around a lunch table, and you go to a conference, maybe it is Prosper again this year if you end up going, or another one. And everyone at the cocktail party has a really rosy ass story to tell about their brand. Like, let me tell you how much sales I have. Let me tell you how my brand's evolving. But
I'm
almost
a 7-figure seller. Yes.
yeah.
Hashtag passive income.
That's right. And so what you realize when you scratch the surface is that about half of it is kind of like BS. And, right. And so for me, as a CFO, the guy who actually wanted to give my clients good counsel on how to get a maximum exit or how to grow their businesses, I needed to know what the real answer to the question was. How profitable are these accounts, are these businesses? And so that was kind of the beginning of our quest, was just saying, well, I sold a healthcare company 3.5 years ago, Stephen, and one of the most helpful things I found was an industry study that I could subscribe to and see what the other competitors were doing and how everyone was performing. And we just tried to create it. It's still small. Hopefully next year we'll be closer to $1 billion in revenue and that we can include. But even at $250 million, it's valid enough to say, these businesses are the rich are getting richer. The guys that actually have products that are solving problems that can figure out how to get through that awkward adolescence of scale are making a tremendous living right now, and frankly are getting outrageous multiples from the aggregator funds that are stepping in and trying to buy up the cash flow. And so, yeah, that's kind of our interest. It's kind of been fun to look at the data and not have a BS cocktail answer. I have a real answer to, well, cost of goods sold is 30%. It just is. We've got $250 million in hard sales that we can look at, that kind of thing.
So we'd love to link to your study. Definitely send that over to Sierra and she'll add it in for us. Thank you, Sierra, for putting together our pod and helping us behind the scenes. So Tyler, what kind of questions or subject matter do you think that we should ask the audience to ask you, if that makes sense?
Sure.
Should they be asking about the study? Should they be asking about aggregators, their business financials? Where do you think we should try and encourage people to ask questions today?
Well, I'm kind of looking at the comments. I think there's some finance, anything related to finance. So, Stephen, your expertise is in driving tacos performance and understanding top line performance. My expertise is on really the intersection of finance and e-commerce, whether that's I'm angling for an exit or I'm looking to improve my profitability, improve my cash flow. And I'd be happy to talk anything that's interesting to you guys in those areas.
Perfect. So you heard it from Tyler. Ask any financial question today. We'll start taking questions now. Glenn asked, most of my competitors are showing 5-star, whereas my product is a genuine 4.1 rating. Is there any point in spending money on Amazon AdWords when I look at the worst product on the page? Glenn, I'll take this question. So I would say the average rating on Amazon is 4.1. So you're smack dab right on the average. It's never been harder to generate reviews on Amazon. It's a very hard thing right now. They just got rid of early reviewer program. And I think I was one of the first to break that news a couple weeks ago before it became official. We went live with a video on a rumor. Shouldn't do that, but we did. And got it right. But in any case, I would say, Glenn, everything is worth testing. I think AdWords is easier to prove whether it converts or not versus Facebook, because the beta tools for the Amazon attribution actually do connect over. All right, so SC Trojan Baller 123 says, if I own ABC LLC and want to operate under the brand name of Good Time Coffee, do I need to register a DBA for that brand under my LLC? I plan to have multiple brands under this LLC. Tyler, you actually might know the answer to this. I'll go to you first.
Yeah, so there's two parts to this question. What this asker is asking is, if I'm going to try to sell a brand, I am a big proponent of having kind of Tyler Jefcoat LLC as my mothership, and then warehousing my multiple brands in their own LLC. So every time I have a different Seller Central account, I want to have a really clean set of financials so that if I go to raise cash or sell my business, I run into as little friction as possible. I don't know that you necessarily, let me just say this. I think if there's an incentive to separate the legal part of it. In other words, if I'm selling products and if somebody were to sue that product company, I don't want them to get to my mothership company. It's not that expensive to hang a separate LLC, have Good Time Coffee LLC, that is owned by the mothership co that I own. I think that's probably how I would set it up. And it gives me two benefits. One is I get the protection of having two separate legal entities in case something were to go weird. And if I were to, and then the other one is if I were to go sell, all of a sudden I've got a clean, closed ecosystem where I can go to the fund or investor that's buying me and say, here's exactly the dollars that came in and out of this business. If I have, like, say, for instance, a virtual assistant, I can pay them through the mother co and keep that off the P&L for the business I'm trying to sell, because I don't want to have to fight any more add back battles than I have to, right? I'm going to win some of those. I'm going to lose some of those.
People are not going to know what add backs are.
Sorry.
So go ahead and explain that.
So at the bottom of your profit and loss statement, you're going to have your net operating profit, kind of what's left. But some of the expenses, your investor is not going to continue to have to pay. In other words, that you're paying yourself a salary. I'm writing off my vacation to the Bahamas because it's a board meeting. I can make the argument that needs to be added back. I need to get additional. Instead of you punishing me for that expense, that's not an ongoing business expense. The problem, Stephen, as you know, is that every time I put something in front of an investor and say, this one I want you to add back, I'm not going to win every one of those battles. And so if I can just keep all the BS off of this P&L, put it up in the mother co, right off my cell phone. If I'm going to do something that my tax guy says I can legally do it. But I want to make my brand that I'm going to sell as squeaky clean as I possibly can. And I think you guys should probably think about doing that also, especially if you're more than $1 million in sales and you're thinking about a larger exit.
Real quick, we're going to talk a little bit about aggregators today too. So what is an Amazon aggregator? An Amazon aggregator is somebody that acquires a lot of FBA businesses. If you go to AmazonAggregators.com, I'll put a link to this in the comment section. You can see we actually have a form fill if anybody's interested in selling their business. We'll get you in touch with the right aggregator that's a good fit for you. And so these are a list of every aggregator that we know about. If you're an aggregator watching this, don't hesitate to reach out and let us know if you want to be added to this. But Thrasio, Heyday, and almost 100 other ones. Long list. We actually have direct links to as much information as we have on these companies and what they're trying to do and whatnot. So if anybody's interested about that, the add back conversation that Tyler just went through is very pertinent, especially if you go to sell your business, because you need to know how to have those conversations. And if you don't know how to have those conversations, perhaps it might even be better to go through a broker like Quiet Light Brokerage instead of going direct to an aggregator. All right, so let's go to our next question here. Mark says, I love that point of the low overhead. People always talk about margins and multipliers, but the real question is overhead. Yeah. Tyler, you want to add anything further to that?
I will, and it's really funny. I'm adding this quote because you had mentioned the interview we did a few years ago. I went back and listened to like 5 minutes of it, and we actually had this exact discussion. So you don't even have to go watch it now because we'll have it again here.
We're gonna link to all the videos we've done with Tyler as well in the comments.
Yeah, we go into more depth in that video, but basically every time you have an expense on your P&L, you need to run it through 4 really simple questions. Does this expense increase my revenue? That's the first one. Does this expense make me more efficient where it decreases my future expenses, right? So think about if I were to, for instance, something like accounting, right? Getting compliant so I don't end up in jail is a good idea. So spend a little bit of money now, but it's a good expense because it makes me less likely to have a big expense later. So does it increase my revenue? Does it decrease my expenses? Does it accelerate my cash cycle? In other words, could I invest a little bit of money in a new mold, for instance, and it make it to where I can have a second supply chain partner in Mexico and get my product twice as fast? That might be a good investment of cash. And then the fourth question is, or does it make my life so much better that I don't care? Like, for instance, if you're buying your University of Georgia Bulldog tickets and you just feel like I gotta have it. But I think to Mark's point there, every overhead expense that I can eliminate or that I can honestly say doesn't fit these 4 questions, it's not making me richer somehow, I'm going to make my business run better. I'm not going to have to borrow as much money. I'm going to be worth more when I go to the market. I'm not going to have those add back arguments like we were talking about.
Tyler, let's pull back up on screen the study that you did here in a couple of moments. Mark says, I could tell Tyler was from Georgia. Accent gave it away. If anybody wants to guess where I grew up and try and guess my accent, I would be very curious to hear your guesses. We'll see if anybody gets it right. Karen says, I have 2 different brands that I'd like to sell, but I have just opened a seller account, which I want for ideas that do not fit the other 2 brands. My end goal is to sell off 2 of the three brands. So Karen, I would say it's completely fine to have any number of brands in any good on one Seller Central account. But the part of your comment here that I would suggest is if you know which two of the three you're going to sell, I would probably keep those on a separate Seller Central account, because you cannot transfer FBA goods between accounts. And for tax and tracking, you'll make Tyler Jefcoat's job easier when he helps you sell the business from a financial standpoint. So Tyler, any thoughts on this one?
No, I think you're right. I mean, so you're talking about, I want a sandbox. I want a place to test my ideas. And then, so I would personally, if I could have kind of that mother co, Tyler Jefcoat LLC, it's my testing ground. Once I have a proof of concept with a brand, as quickly as I can, I want to pivot it to its own Seller Central account, get it its own QuickBooks Online file where I have a clean, closed loop for that business, so that in 12 months, because you kind of want trailing 12 months of just solid financials, I can then turn around and sell that Seller Central account. It's clean. There's no junk in it. And so I can constantly be doing the sandbox in some mother co, my original LLC, and then just spin them off, And so the problem, I guess that's the one issue here, is if you're going to do the kind of test spin-off method, it's sometimes may take a few months before you have enough financial data in the new system to exit really well. But I think if you're testing products, you're probably not going to sell for a year anyway. So I think what you described there is a perfect way to go about it.
Well, very good. We've got somebody watching from Brazil. Hello, Brazil. It's good to see you down there. All right, we're going to bring up on screen again the client profitability chart. We went through this in the first part of our segments. We're going to keep it up on screen because I think it's just genuinely interesting data. So, cost of goods averaged aggregate study on a quarter of $1 billion in sellers that Tyler has and his company Seller Accountant have looked at. You can see their actual numbers and averages. So how does your business stack up against this chart? That's the question today. We'll keep this up on screen as we kind of take the next couple of questions if people want to take a look at this a little bit longer. So Karen says, the lawyer suggested getting a product listed with the trademark already on it, but I can't list all brands on one account since the brands need to match. So Karen, I would say file a trademark for every brand you have. If anybody needs a trademark, you can go over to myamazonguy.com. We do file trademarks for you. And you need to have a specimen, a cell phone shot of each item with packaging on it. And so then there's kind of that chicken or egg question. Like, I can't get my item listed on Amazon because I don't have brand registry, which I don't have a trademark, but I need it listed somewhere so I can get my trademark. So just what I would do is I just list it on any public website or any website entity, and that will check your box there to kind of fix the chicken or egg question. Brett says, what Tyler sees average taco percentage for scaling businesses?
Yeah, so my favorite total advertising cost of sales, as you kind of look down our example here, here's my favorite business to work with. I love products that have unusually good margins on the product. So maybe instead of this number being 29, 30 points in actually what I'm having to spend, I wonder if I can change the color of this here. Let's see here, because yellow is hard to see. Like if I could have this be, well, it's not going to change. Okay. If I could have this be like 25%, where I have more margin in my product, I'm not spending as much to secure my COGS. And then I can therefore afford to outcompete my competitors by spending more on advertising, 12, 13, 14, 15% of my budget. For me, that's my favorite win. I want to be able to outcompete my best competitor with ad spend, but I can't afford to do that unless I've got a great supply chain. I've really engineered a product that there's some margin. In other words, that's another way of saying I need to be able to command enough of a premium on my product that it's a good product that I can afford to advertise if I need to. And so I don't know that there's a right answer for that. I think if you have, if your product cost of goods sold is 40% of your budget, you're not going to have as much budget for ads. They need to be 1%, 2%, 3% tacos. If your product cost of goods sold is kind of this average 30%, then that 10, 11% tacos is a really good number, even for growth. And then if you have unusually good COGS, like I have some clients that only have 17, 18, 19% of their budget in cost of goods sold. They just have a really good high margin product. Those guys can afford to spend more money on advertising, and they should, to maximize the growth and profitability of their business.
Glenn says nearly every product is 4.3 stars and a 5th star, where we are at 4.1 and so in the 4th star. So Glenn, you may want to try and maybe put some product inserts into your items. Don't ask for reviews on the product inserts, but maybe ask for pictures of people taking and using your product, just to try and create some community behind. And when you ask for pictures of somebody using a product, they're more likely to go write a review.
Yeah.
Brett says, can you explain seller discretionary earnings when it's pertaining to selling an Amazon business? That's a great question.
That is a great question. Actually, I can explain it, and I have an example on my other screen. Let me just pull it up here. And whoa, that was quick, because this is on the screen. Okay, so this is an example I used for somebody else recently when I was recording my own blog or something like that. And so the point is, let me put this expense back up here for my Go Dogs tickets. You're going to come up with a number for operating profit, and your broker or your partner is going to help you try to negotiate some add backs. That was the add back discussion was what we had a few minutes ago. And so what's going to happen is some of the expenses that fall on your P&L, for instance, the most common one is called owner's salary. Whatever I'm paying myself as the owner, I'm going to get that as an add back. And so instead of my operating profit now being $144,000 for the year, once I've added back that owner's salary, my SDE, or the seller's benefit or seller's discretionary earnings, is $240. So add backs are what give you SDE, if that makes sense. And so, but here's the problem. Like I said, this is when you come to something like an e-commerce support tool. Maybe I'm spending money on 7 redundant products, Helium 10 and Seller Labs and Sellix and Seller Legend and all these different products that are doing the same thing. They're not going to they won't always let me add back those extra products. So I want to go ahead and cut them off my P&L now so that I can maximize the arguments. Obviously, if I buy my UGA tickets, I'm going to get that as an add back, which will therefore increase my seller's discretionary earnings. And then to take the illustration one step further, once you calculate that SDE, you kind of multiply it times a market multiple, depending on how strong your business is. The reviews play into that, your market dominance, your volume plays into it, your growth rate. And then once you establish your multiple, you're going to add to it some amount of inventory that's sitting on your balance sheet that is, considered good sellable inventory that the buyer will be willing to pay you for, and that will equal your ultimate total deal value. Does that make sense, Stephen?
It does. So basically, it's money that you can justify putting your multiple on after you've factored in the add backs. So
that's exactly right.
Pretty great explanation, Tyler. I think anybody who listened to that got it. Karen says, can you sell multiple brands on one Amazon seller account? Yes, you can, Karen. In fact, I recommend you do that. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah, the one caveat I would add to that discussion, Stephen, is sell multiple brands on one Seller Central account. That's a great idea. But when it comes time to sell, it's going to be difficult to split those brands back out. So just be emotionally ready to sell those 2 brands together.
All of them.
That's right. Yeah. Sell the entire Seller Central account together with the seamless accounting, the seamless supply chain. But if you have 3 or 4 brands in the same Seller Central account, that's cool. Yeah.
Okay. Our next question comes from Mohammed. Hello, Amazon just inactivated his listing and asked me for applicable product safety testing and compliance documents per product for pregnancy. How do I fix it, please? So Mohammed, my recommendation is hire us for a 1-hour coaching call or hire us for a reinstatement service. We'll put a link to that in the comment section. It's a very difficult thing to reactivate listings. It's not pleasurable work, but it's very dirty work, and it will require some extensive efforts on our part to help you out. So hopefully we can help you, though. AJ says, when buying other companies, do you roll their products into your account or keep separate accounts for each brand that you buy? Can you have more than 2 seller accounts? I'll give a quick answer and I'll toss it to you, Tyler. So if I were you, AJ, I would keep them separate and I would run multiple accounts because the transferring from one account to another is extremely difficult. Can you have more than one account? Yes, you can. In fact, we have tremendous amounts of videos and tutorials on how to run multiple accounts. We have an entire playlist on this subject, running multiple accounts, and that's tailored to aggregators, but also anybody who wants to aggregate their own number of brands will find value in that. So Tyler, what are your thoughts?
I agree completely. I think the headache factor of having to take your FBA inventory back and put it in a new seller account is kind of a pain. That's one issue. Although I've seen it done, I will say this way: I have some friends that have bought products and have just integrated them into their Seller Central account. You can certainly do that, but I think the old stigma that Amazon's going to shut me down, that I've just got to be, I just don't think that's happening. I mean, most of the aggregator funds that I've been working with, and I do a lot of due diligence for them, they just end up inheriting the Seller Central account and continuing to run on it. And I think that's probably becoming the best practice.
We also had a video with Quiet Light Brokerage yesterday where we were talking about how to run multiple accounts at the same time. So check that out after you watch our session today. All right. Emily, this is my wife. I love that Tyler just calls you Pope. Brings me back to my high school days.
You know, my wife's name is Emily, also Emily, and she also calls me Jefcoat, so I can't get away from it either. So
nice. That's unusual. All right, so scrolling down here, we got Doug who says hi, Doug. Thanks for coming by today. Kuba says we're creating brands on Amazon, but don't want to sell them. We want to operate them. Do you think in some time aggregators can invest in such companies? And I think this is actually happening already, but I think, Tyler, you might have a better insight on this one. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a really great question. So I think when you think about investing in any concept, the idea is my return on investment going to be better just putting my money here? And I think so far, most of the aggregators are betting that they're going to be better at scale than you or I will be. They're going to be able to get really smart people because they're going to have millions and millions of dollars in sales, and they're going to believe that they're more efficient than we are. But I think the flip side of this, and I was going to make this point earlier, but since it came up, I just want to make the comment. Not every aggregator on Pope's list there is a smart money aggregator. I've done work for enough of them now that some of them are extremely competent. They're great operators. You're going to be ready to trust them with your baby, and they're going to do well with them. But for everyone that's great, there's another one out there that will potentially fall flat here in the next year because their ability to operate is diminished. And so now, to get to your point, Kuba, once that starts happening,
let me make a quick comment on that. So it behooves you to do your homework on the aggregators. This is why we've created that page, so that we can introduce you to an aggregator that we think will take your baby to a toddler stage and actually make it to the teenage years. Because some of them are going to offer you profit sharing, and you need to make sure that they run it correctly. Otherwise, that profit sharing is worth nothing. So you want to get your best bang for your buck on that. The other comment I would make is I think that a lot of the money that's coming in is venture capital money, where they take millions of dollars and they bet it all on black. And that's a really good way to make money in venture capitalism world, but it's not necessarily great if you land on red. And so this Amazon passive income thing that I like to tout and indict almost every podcast is basically because you can't just throw money into the system and expect it to make money. It's not how it works. You got to know how to operate it. And so there are not as many good operators like Tyler was talking about. So go into Kuba's comment here now.
No, but I think you nailed it there. I think there are not as many operators there, and some of them will figure it out. But to your point about venture capital in general, I talked to one of the largest aggregator firms earlier this week, and their philosophy is we're going to place large bets and hope to get about 35 to 40% of them to win. And we know that the return on investment for those 35, 40% will be so big that we're going to be happy. But got to remember, if I have an earnout structure and my deal is part of the 60+% that fails, I might be a victim of the fact that they don't have a really dialed in operation. So I just agree with what you said there, Stephen, in that when I'm talking to aggregators, one reason that you may have some benefit of going through a company like Quiet Light with Joe Valley and his team. But the other reason is I just want to make sure I interview these guys and I'm convinced that they actually know what they're doing, that they have some chops. and it's a little bit of a double-edged sword, Stephen. I've seen this. The two largest deals that I've seen so far were with Amazon-based brands that were one of the first deals for a really large aggregator. They kind of served as the cornerstone bedrock of that aggregator fund, and they're doing extremely well. So they got this like 6x, 6.5x multiple exit when they exited the business. But the flip side of that is if you gamble wrong and you have an earnout structure or maybe even a roll-up structure with a fund that flops in 6 months, that 6.5x multiple doesn't mean much to you. So I think that's something to be careful of.
Our next question here is your Amazon business, if your Amazon business is your side hustle and you don't need a salary from it, is there a golden rule on how many years you should invest all profits back into the business before pulling money out? You're the money guy. This one's yours.
I don't know that there's a golden rule. I think my golden rule is if I'm going to work any amount of my time on a business, I want to make money on it. So what I want to be careful of is, and this is not what you're saying, I'm sure, but one scenario is I'm not very profitable and I'm not going to pull a salary out and I'm going to kind of hide behind the fact that I'm putting it all back into the business. But what's really happening is I'm just over expensing and I'm spending too much money. That's a problem that you need to fix before you worry about any profit distributions. But, here's the thing. There's a certain amount of headache and risk that goes into building an Amazon business. There's some stress. And I'm going to be getting some legitimate return on my investment from an emotional standpoint. For me, Emily, my wife, I need to bring a little bit of bacon home for the headache and the stress and the nights that I work and that kind of thing. Or it's an unacceptable side hustle or permanent hustle or whatever it is for me. You're probably in the same boat. Having said that, if you have the luxury of putting a small amount of money into an Amazon business, growing it for 3 to 5 years, and then having a big exit, and you've never had to pull the cash out beforehand, you are not any less rich for having reinvested it. The only thing you've done is you haven't had to take out any debt. So I don't think there's a right or wrong answer there, except for the fact that I actually want you to be profitable. I don't want you to kind of think kind of sort of. I want to be able to look at your P&L and know that it's legit and that you're actually making money and that you're making the choice to say, I don't need that money. I'm going to leave it over here and not touch it. Cool. I get that because you might be betting on yourself. I'm betting that I can reinvest this cash with me. I'm going to launch new products. I'm going to make a better return on that investment than if I were to put it in the stock market or, buy Bitcoin or something like that. Right. So I think that's the way I would want to view it. I would view it like an investor is my point.
A lot of people watching this are familiar with retail arbitrage, where you're putting in, buying discounted goods and then flipping them on Amazon. Mm-hmm. So Tyler, my question for you, this is my own question, is, are some sellers doing financial arbitrage, and what would be the problem with that?
I mean, I think the current private label model, just to use that arbitrage nugget, is basically a supply chain arbitrage. And so in the same sense that retail arbitrage is dangerous at scale because there's pressure on your margins and you might not have a business one day, that's kind of the issue with a retail arbitrage, unless you're the best at doing it. It's kind of the same thing with, I kind of view your question, Stephen, as being highly leveraged. It's almost like I have a ton of debt. That's what leverage is a synonym for I have a lot of debt on my business. That makes the business kind of flimsy, where if something small happens, like for instance, a year ago, Stephen, we were looking at the beginning of this supply chain disruption within FBA.
Good black swan event comes in and wipes you out.
Yeah, seriously. Listen, this is a case study, it's a cautionary tale. One of our clients had $1.2 million, not in revenue, but in profit in 2019, but had so little money in their bank, had so much leverage, so much debt on the business that 2 weeks in supply chain disruption, right around this time when COVID hit a year ago, and they were dead meat, gone, a $10 million a year business. And so I think you can play roulette in a sense, right, where you're so risky that there's no safety in your business. And I would encourage you to lower your own risk of a heart attack by making your business healthier. Yeah.
My only 2 cents I'll add to that is I think every business needs to have a year of capital on hand to run its payroll. So as long as you have a year of payroll in the bank, go ahead and be a little bit more risky. Karen says, you're all awesome. Thank you. Maybe I should have had you read that one with the Georgia accent. Yeah. So next question, Charles. So following Karen's question, selling only one brand in a seller account where there is multiple brands is a no-go when it comes to maximizing profits when selling?
Yeah, it's not impossible to sell it, but your ability. So put yourself in the investor's shoes. They're looking for a way to independently. They're paying somebody like me. We do a lot of due diligence where our job is to go sneak into your Seller Central account, grab that unified transaction report in the date range area, and try to validate the numbers that you've put forward for your P&L and balance sheet over the last 12 months. And you're making that much harder for the person to do. And I'll give you an even more important example is that Amazon only stores the advertising API data for 60 to 90 days now, right? And so your ability to convince that investor, I promise I only spent this dollar amount on advertising for brand A, but this dollar amount was advertising for brand B. It is very, very challenging to win that argument. And so you end up ultimately just having a higher risk profile and getting a lower multiple. Doesn't mean you can't do it. Doesn't mean that it may not even be worth it for you to split them up now if you're going to be close to going to market. But just know that all things being equal, it's kind of like when I walk into a car lot, I'm going to buy a car. If that car dealership can have my anxiety as a buyer go down emotionally, the cars are clean, the dude that comes out of the shop looks like he's taking a shower, I'm going to be able to more
Hasn't
likely
smoked in my brand new car. Yep.
yeah, right. That kind of thing, right? Versus you go out there and it looks like somebody just kicked a dent in the car. It's filthy. The first time you try to turn it over, it doesn't crank up. That's the problem if you put together financials or a picture that make the buyer be like, whoa, what's going on here? That almost always translates into a little bit of a lower price point when you exit.
Brett says, what's Tyler's favorite tax strategy for Amazon brands wanting to sell in 5 years? To expand on that specific things he needs from a tax perspective that he sees successful brands do year to year.
Well, so I'm not a CPA. I'm not a tax guy. I think, first of all, I don't even do my own taxes. I've had to become nerdy enough at them, but I'm an entrepreneur that happens to have a degree in accounting. My MBA focuses in finance. So you get what you pay for when you ask me for tax advice. But my tax advice is I like Tom Wheelwright's Building Tax-Free Wealth as part of the Rich Dad series. I think you should read that book. The idea for me is, how do I mitigate taxes and not just kick them down the road? So for me, if I can find legal ways to use entity structure. So one thing I would, for instance, do, and again, non-CPA disclaimer here, if you have that mother co, I have Tyler's LLC that owns the brand that I'm selling, and I have the ability to book some of the marketing expenses back and forth. There are some legal ways that you can create valid tax deductions without destroying the financials of the brand you want to sell in the future. But I'm not a CPA. I'm asking my guy the same question. We thankfully had a great year last year. The business I sold 3 years ago, I got the final big check in November. So I'm in the same boat you are, trying to figure out how to not pay all of that in taxes. My best advice is have good accounting. And frankly, if I'm going to skimp on anything, it is not my tax CPA. I want to pay top dollar for a CPA that understands small business and how to really leverage the tax code to lower my tax liability. But just maximizing a 401k or an IRA and kicking the can down the road is such a poor man's mentality in my mind. I don't want to wait and pay taxes when I'm 70, because I'm going to be richer when I'm 70 than I am now. And so I want to organize my life and my investments in such a way to bite the bullet and pay the taxes I have to pay at as low a rate as I can, and then build long-term assets that generate profitability for me. That's my philosophy. You wouldn't have me do your taxes because I'm not a tax guy.
I love that last bit. That was incredible insight there, Tyler. All right. Brett also says, Tyler or Steven, have you seen any deals being done with brands that have Me Too products, but the best sellers in niches and good profits? I definitely have, Brett. Yeah. It's just they're less sexy because it's easier to rip them off. So the question is how valuable are the reviews and generated business that you have versus my ability to come in and rip you off and Me Too, you, me three.
Mm-hmm. But here's the thing, though. If you were the Me Too, but now you're the best seller, the other guys become the Me Too. I just want to say that. I think the reality is because so much of this due diligence is around the performance of the Amazon brand, you actually may have discovered a better way to market it, or a better way to package it, or a better way to design it. And yeah, are you going to get a maximum D2C multiple where someone thinks they can take you into Home Depot? Maybe not, but I still think it's a sellable business if it's performing.
CL Wells too says, thanks guys. Appreciate the input. You're very welcome.
You're welcome.
And Brett says, Tom Wheelwright's the man. Thanks for the info.
He is the man.
All right. So Tyler, what else do you think people need to do financially as they think about the next 9 months for their business this year?
So the biggest piece of advice I would give you, gosh, I don't want to make this too technical, but to use an algebraic formula, however much profit I made in the last 12 months. So in your head, think about it. What was my profit number for the last 12 months? And then how much average inventory did I have? So let's just make these numbers really simple. If I had $200,000 in profit over the last 12 months and I had $100,000 in inventory, what I've learned about myself as an operator is that I make $2 in profit for every dollar in inventory. I hope you guys are tracking here. If I were to fast forward towards my dream, my goal for the end of 2021, if I want to now make $1 million in profit, I can use that same ratio to say I'm going to need to have a 2-to-1 ratio. So if I'm going to make $1 million in profit, I got to have about $500,000 in working capital or inventory. This is really helpful, like super easy math to say, oh, I've currently got $100,000 in inventory. That gets me a a $200,000 profit. That's cool. Now I want to double that. I'm going to have to double my inventory, which means time to go get a loan now, maybe time to go try to raise cash while I'm not desperate and not waiting until I'm in an emergency stage where I have to take really crappy loans. I think that's probably the best counsel I could give you for planning this year.
Great counsel. By the way, back to, I think it was Brett that mentioned this. If you want people to invest in your business, there is an Empire Flippers Capital. I'm not affiliated or associated with Empire Flippers in any way, but I am familiar that like a month and a half, 2 months ago, they ran out with like an ability to go fund businesses where people are working on other projects. And not only that, you can now like invest in their people doing exactly what you're talking about. So not a plug for them, just so much as just to recognize that these sort of things exist out there to not only finance your own brands, but also to finance somebody else's. So there's some tools out there. Tyler, have you seen any other ones similar to that?
Not that exact model, but I have seen some other creative kind of almost like an aggregator kind of models out there. Actually, Thrasio is now starting to lend money. So talk about a genius play. You raise $1 billion and now you start funding inventory, but funding it in such a way that you get back end access to Seller Central. You can go ahead and just assess these brands and try to pick off the best ones and buy them, right? So I got to give those guys credit. They're doing a pretty good job there. I don't know of any other like funds right now that are actively trying to take a minority position, trying to take just a seat on the bus kind of investment. I haven't seen too many of those, but I know they do exist.
Got it. We're going to take one or two more questions here. Brett says, one more, sorry. How valuable do you see Shopify profits and customer lists being in selling an Amazon business?
I don't know that I have an answer to the like, I have 20,000 emails, so it's worth $1 an email. I can't translate it that way. I do think that there is still, first of all, there's two different kinds of investors out there. There are some of these aggregator funds that don't really want that. They really just want high and tight, only Amazon. And maybe their ideal profile would be $1 million a year in profit. I've got 10 products and I'm 100% Amazon.com with one supplier, right? I mean, I think there's some funds that really want it to be high and tight. They're going to pay a higher multiple there. But there are other funds out there, and one of them on Steven, on your list there, Suma, has kind of reached out to me and told me this, where they're leaning a little bit more towards direct-to-consumer based brands. And it's not just Suma, they're just the one I talked to this week. But they are more focused on, do I believe that this set of products could scale beyond Amazon using our huge resources? And a great way to validate that for them, that you do have the ability to scale beyond Amazon, is to have already scaled beyond Amazon, right? To already have some sales on your Shopify site that includes the list. The other thing, and I remember talking to the VP of Marketplace from a huge company called Vermont Teddy Bear a couple years ago, Liz, she's a friend of mine. She's wonderful. But they use their direct-to-consumer email list that they've been cultivating over years and decades. They use it to launch their new ASINs on Amazon because you have the customer and you can send emails out. So there is value in that customer list. I just don't know how to turn it into an exact multiple at this point. And it depends on who's buying your company.
I kind of like to joke about how reviews, I would put them at like, I don't know, $15 or something like per review.
Right.
Has anybody ever tried to put a financial amount on a product review in your world?
No, but I bet they will. How hard would it be for someone like maybe like Thrasio that's like scraping this data to turn around and do after we've done this for a year and we know we're happy with this brand, we're sad with this brand, let's divide it by the number of cumulative reviews for the brand and see if there's some data points. I don't think so. I still think the same thing. I feel like I've heard you say this a lot, Pope, which is just, can I be above that 4.1 kind of average, right? Can I be there's another bump between somewhere, you can tell me what it is, somewhere between 4.6 and 4.75. There's another bump in like SEO within Amazon, but I don't know how to actually, and there's also, obviously, if you have 10,000 reviews, that's better than having 0 reviews. So I think a lot of it depends on your category, right? If you're in a category where there's lots of competitors, then having a 3,000 review count lead is really important. If you're in a smaller category, you might still have a lead, but it might only be 500, right? So I think it just depends on which market you're playing in.
There never is an all size fits all answer, is there, in the financial world? All right. So Tyler, I appreciate you coming on the My Amazon Guy podcast. If somebody wants to get in touch with Seller Accountant or you, where should they go?
Yeah. So if you just go to selleraccountant.com, com. You can find, we do a weekly blog, try to talk about how finance intersects with e-commerce. My first name, Tyler at selleraccountant.com. Feel free to email me directly if you have any questions. I'd love to interact with you. Thanks for having me on, Stephen.
We highly endorse Tyler as well as his services. Tyler is one of the good guys in the Amazon space, and we've known him basically since the inception. And I'm obsessed with your business too, Tyler.
Thanks, buddy. I'm obsessed with you too, Pope. I'm so obsessed with you.
I appreciate it. Well, that's My Amazon Guy podcast today. Tomorrow, we're going to have our typical Friday noon Eastern Standard Time live Q&A. Ask any Amazon question. It's one of my favorite formats, and we hope to see you there next. We'll have some links to Tyler's other videos with My Amazon Guy, as well as links to all of that information on how to manage your finances in the Amazon world. And keep track of your bookkeeping and pay attention to those Amazon aggregators, as well as a link to the study that Tyler put out. We appreciate you for watching the My Amazon Guy podcast. My name is Stephen Pope.